Before we get started extending our application so that we can utilize the metadata capacities of MEF, let's first run our application so we all are on the same page as what it will do right now. The application will load, and basically I can click this load button, and what it'll do is it'll load up all the exports that I can find and put them in this combo or list box. And it'll output the class name as what it's found as by doing the reflection, to get type.name. And that works, but I'd really like to be able to have a real name and a real version attached to my plugins. So how do we go about adding that? The first thing I want to do is I want to create an interface that will define what my metadata should look like. And I'm going to want this to have a name and a version. So that is the two pieces of metadata I would like to export. The next thing I need to do, I want to go ahead and create a custom attribute that inherits off of the MEF attribute in order to give me some strong typing on my metadata. This needs to inherit off of the export attribute. And I want to have it implement my interface, so let's go ahead and create a property called name. And then what I want to do now is actually go ahead and create a constructor that I can provide my name and my version through. And lastly, what I need to do in order to get strong typing of this is actually call into the base constructor of the export attribute. And you'll see that there's three different overloads. The one I want to use takes the type. And this type is going to be my interface iPlugin metadata. Then finally what I need to do for this is actually mark it with the metadata attribute. This is a MEF attribute. And then also provide the attribute usages. I've now defined my interface that will define the values I expect on my metadata. I've also defined my actual custom attribute, which will allow us to reach into the MEF framework to expose our metadata. Now what I need to do is come up to my default plugin and actually tell my plugin to use the plugin metadata attribute. And when I do that, you'll see that I'm given parameters of name and version. So let's go ahead and call this default. And I've now defined my metadata for my plugin, and I've given it a name of default and a version of 1.0.0. So how do I actually wire up my composition container so it can utilize this metadata? To do this, I need to go over to my plugin manager. And plugin manager is just a class for this application that will actually manage MEF and all the catalogs and actually all the imports and exports. This here is my current list of plugins that I'm looking for and marked with my import many attribute. This will work great, but it will not give me the ability to use the metadata capacity within MEF. To do that, I need to change this ever so slightly. I need to use the lazy syntax. Lazy is a new way in the .NET 4.0 framework so that it can delay the instantiation of things, and MEF has full support for that. And you'll see that lazy has an overload, and it takes T metadata. This T metadata is going to be my interface that I want. Now I'm going to have to tweak all my implementations of this real quick, so hold on. So now that I've changed my plugin manager to actually load my plugins with its metadata, we need to now go ahead and change our GUI so we can actually handle the metadata appropriately. You'll see that when my XAML.cs class opens up, you'll see that I get some red squigglies. And the reason for that is I was originally just passing in an list of plugins. Now I need to pass in my plugin with my metadata. But when I copy and paste that, pay attention to something. Lazy is still black, and in fact I actually get an warning telling me that I have an incorrect number of parameters. The reason for this is the way that the base framework defines lazy. It only takes a type of T. MEF extends that to pass in the type of metadata. So what you need to do is make sure you have reference added to system.composition within your GUI framework as well if you're going to use it at the GUI level. You'll see as soon as I add reference to it, my warnings go away. Now I do get one more warning, and that's right here, and that is telling me that I'm trying to pass in as an plugin, but my little list box item expects it to be a lazy of plugin and plugin metadata. So I need to change one more spot. Now I'm pretty good, except for I still get one more exception. That's right here. And that is because now when you're utilizing the lazy capacity, I need to use .value so I can actually invoke my plugin. The last what I want to do is I want to come down here and I want to tweak what I'm outputting in my list box. So now that I've made all my changes, I should now be able to utilize the metadata capacity within MEF. So let's go ahead and run our application again. Click the load button now. I now see my name is default and my version is 1.0.0. So there you have it. I've now created the ability to have custom metadata provided on my plugins and have MEF load that, and I can now utilize that within my application. So let's do a quick review on what it is we need to add in order to get custom metadata working. First thing I would recommend you doing is create an interface that defines your metadata. The next thing you would want to do is create an attribute that inherits off of the MEF attribute, and this will allow us to strongly type our metadata. And make sure that you call into the base and provided the type of the metadata interface, not your export interface. This will allow it to work appropriately. You need to give it the metadata attribute on your custom attribute. That will tell MEF to be able to pick it up. You also need to provide attribute usages because again, MEF's doing everything with reflection. So if you don't provide this attribute usage line, things aren't going to work and you're not going to get any plugins loaded. And then finally, you want to decorate your interface, your plugin, with your metadata attribute, and then provide it the details that are now the metadata. And if you're not familiar or comfortable with using the magic strings here, of course you can use constants if you want. For the sake of this demo, I went ahead and used magic strings. Then you also need to make one more change to the way you import your data. You no longer can just import them into a list or a enumerable, but you're going to have to utilize the new lazy keyword within .NET so you can load that in as well as provide the interface and the metadata interface. And doing it this way will allow MEF to lazy instantiate that. And then finally, go ahead and use the data, the plugin as it's loaded via MEF, and make sure that you're using the .value to actually get to the core or the implementation that you imported. So I hope you learned something. Until next time.